Tonight we're going to be comparing the Sig Romeo 1 with the Leupold Deltapoint Pro. Now both of these optics are very common on the competitive shooting scene, partially because the Sig optic, it mates up like hand in glove to the Sig carry optics offerings, and the Deltapoint Pro is very common because for a long time it was about the biggest window you could get on a reliable miniaturized red dot sight. So there have been a lot of them on open guns, although they're not as common as they used to be. So we'll take it back down to the mat, we'll look at them side by side, the differences as I see them, and we'll finish with the recommendation. So let's get started. All right, so let's get started with the most important parts. We'll talk about actually using the optics. So the first thing you'll probably notice about these two optics is they both have very large windows. They're both bigger than the RMR by a good bit, and even bigger than the Vortex offerings, which is partially why they're so popular, especially the Deltapoint Pro. Now the Sig is every bit as wide as the DPP, however, it's not quite as tall. Now, it's debatable on how much use it is to have a really large window on these optics, but I'll just point out that PCC guys and open gun guys all pick the biggest glass that they can get to fit on top of their guns. And it is an advantage. It's not necessarily exploitable when you're shooting freestyle with both hands on the gun, but where it does start to pay dividends is when you start shooting single-handed, either strong hand only or support hand only. Your index is not quite as polished as it is with two hands on the gun. It's easier to find the dot as you have more area on the screen to keep up with it. So that is a big advantage. It's not a huge difference between the two, although more is generally thought of as better. Now, dot size is something that's often talked about, and the Sig and the Deltapoint Pro both feature roughly the same size dot. Now, the Deltapoint Pro is actually 2.5 MOA, while the Sig is technically 3 MOA, but if you actually see them here, and they appear larger on the camera than they do to the naked eye, but they're roughly the same. Both have a larger dot offering now, with the Sig having their 6 MOA dot and the Deltapoint Pro having its 7.5 MOA triangle, which seems to be a love it or hate it kind of thing, with most people generally preferring the smaller one. I would look at the smaller dot guys. I've kind of come full circle on this. I think the smaller dot is actually an asset, especially when shooting at small targets far away. Now, both of these dots have motion activated or shake awake technology, which can also be called MOTAC technology, which means that if you leave these dots alone, they will put themselves to sleep, but when you pick them back up, they'll be on again and ready to go. This is a good thing for a home defense type thing, where you're going to leave it in the safe and you're going to pick it up and you're going to want it to be on, which is good. It extends the battery life, but if it's going to be carried in a holster all the time, it's never going to go to sleep anyway. But that's a useful feature, and they both have it. Now, the glass color and quality is going to be another thing. You can see kind of the sheen coming off the reflection on both of these is slightly different. The Sig actually discolors stuff to be a little bit green, and the Deltapoint Pro kind of makes it a little more reddish or so. I thought it was a big deal initially, then I got used to the green. I really think it's just going to come down to a preference thing. I don't think it really matters. Both of these are fine. As far as the adjustments are concerned on how you actually zero the dot, you can see that the Sig is actually set up to take a very small screwdriver, which they include with the gun, or you can use a jeweler's screwdriver, which is kind of annoying. And furthermore, these adjustments are not the most positive, especially on the up-down, which may cause issues holding zero. Whereas the Deltapoint Pro has these very huge adjustment knobs, which you can adjust with a case rim. You don't have to actually carry any tools to the range with you, as long as you can find a piece of brass. These are super positive, feel super quality, with a very authoritative click. I certainly give the advantage to the Deltapoint Pro in this regard. It is much more adjustable. But the downside of that is actually adjusting the dot intensity. The Sig has the up-down buttons that, if I'm honest, look and sort of feel like a Casio calculator from the early 1990s, but they are very functional. They work really well. Whereas the Deltapoint Pro has a single button right there, and you kind of have to cycle all the way up or hold it down for a couple seconds and it'll change direction. You can cycle it down. I wish the Deltapoint Pro had an up-down style button like the Sig, but I do like this dot placement. It's out of the way, where I have racked the slide and adjusted my dot inadvertently with the Sig. It's not a huge deal. Again, it's just kind of a preference thing, but I certainly prefer the way the Sig is. But that said, talking about the battery caps, This battery cap requires a torque wrench to fully torque down. You'd have to use the same wrench that you use to put the dot onto the slide to put 5 to 10 inch-pounds of torque onto this battery cap. Whereas the Deltapoint Pro has this beautiful little detente which opens up the battery door, and then the battery is right in there, which is very, very easy, very quick, very useful for changing batteries. And you're going to have to change a good bit of batteries with the Deltapoint Pro. The battery life isn't great. As I mentioned in my initial review, I've got one Deltapoint Pro that has gone literally 8 months without being changed, with about 6 months of continuous carry, and one that crapped the bed after about 4 weeks. So it's kind of a crapshoot, and I really don't know what to tell you. This has only been a range gun with the Romeo 1 Optic. I have no idea what to expect for battery life on the Romeo 1. Romeo 1 takes the 1632 battery versus the 2032 battery on the Deltapoint Pro. I don't know if that means anything, but they are different batteries. Now, as far as the housing is actually concerned, the Deltapoint Pro housing is a little bit taller, which makes the rear sight, when you're co-witnessing, a good bit taller. The Sig sight kind of has a channel built in. If you're using Sig guns, you can use this as a rear sight on the Sig gun. Deltapoint Pro, however, has this little slot right here. You can slot in a adjustable sight that they sell to co-witness with a front that you can buy from somebody like Dawson Precision. And it's kind of a draw there. It's really dealer's choice as far as preference is concerned. Now, talking about the robustness of the dots, both of these dots have had roughly the same finish wear. The paint takes nicks from brass impacts. You can kind of see some there easily on the Sig. Deltapoint Pro just kind of generally looks worn in all the way around, but that is, it's had plenty of brass strikes as well, I assure you. The glass is going to hold up fine. Neither one of the glass had issues with chipping or scratching due to brass impacts, so they're kind of squared away there. Now, the Deltapoint Pro does feature a steel shroud, which is nice. You can see the bolts right there. The steel shroud does add some additional robustness, because if you were to hit the front of the optic on something, the steel shroud is going to take the impact. Similarly, if you drop it, you're going to catch the steel shroud. Whereas the Sig is just this bare magnesium housing, which is super duper light and pretty hard and, well, I guess brittle, some people say. But you can buy a steel shroud for it that makes it strikingly similar to a Deltapoint Pro. Sig sells it for about 50 bucks. Just sort of some extra things you might want to consider when you're considering these optics. First and foremost is going to be the footprint size of these suckers. Now, the Deltapoint Pro has been out for a few years now, and it has become one of the standard footprints for an optic, so much so that the Glock MOS plates come with a plate that fit the Deltapoint Pro, whereas Sig, and this is totally my conjecture, being arrogant and late to the market with their optic, thought that the world would morph around their offering. It didn't, so they had to make a plate that would adapt to the MOS. And to kind of rub salt in an open wound, the Army actually adopted the Deltapoint Pro as its red dot sight to fit on the Sig M17 pistol that the Army is going to be carrying. So the Deltapoint Pro has secured a place in history as one of the default footprints for a red dot optic on a pistol, whereas the Romeo 1 probably hasn't. Now, there are rumors of Sig offering a Deltapoint Pro sized footprint optic that would fit on their M17. It's not out yet, but that's not the Romeo 1, obviously. And now, as far as cost is concerned, it's going to vary by the day. Optics move up and down with the market, it seems, on a weekly basis. Just last week, the Romeo 1 was selling for $300 or more, and this week it's dropped down to about $272 on Amazon. You can check the links in the description to see where it's tracking right now, or shop your favorite online retailers. Similarly, the Deltapoint Pro, I've seen it as low as $352 about 6 months ago. It's up about $399 now, and it just kind of moves around as well. See if you can get them on sale during the big retail holidays. So the Romeo 1 is a lower cost offering at first glance, but if you start adding on options such as the steel shroud, which is $50, the MOS plate that mounts it onto the MOS pistols, which is another $50, and if you want a good optic cover like comes with the Deltapoint Pro that you can actually put over your optic when you're not shooting at a match or on the range so you don't get a bunch of dust on the back side of your lens, that's going to run you about another 10 to 12 bucks on Amazon, because the cover that Sig gives you is kind of cheesy. It just kind of clips onto the shroud, but it comes off really, really easy. I would not trust this. I've dislodged it with my forearm on the range more than one time and had to find it on the ground. So when you balance for that, the prices really start to draw closer together depending on what you end up getting the Romeo 1 for. As far as the actual warranty turnarounds, and that is important in this generation of red dot sights, the Leupold site is tracking about 6 to 8 weeks on turning around a warranted optic. I've heard Sig is about 4 to 6 weeks. However, I've had people get in touch with me who had to warranty their optic and they turned it around in about 3 weeks, which is decent. It's not Vortex decent, but obviously 3 weeks is faster than 6 to 8. So if you held my feet to the fire and made me pick one of these two optics as your chosen optic for defensive carry, then I would say the Deltapoint Pro without reservation. I think the Deltapoint Pro is more robust and is more likely to stand up to the abuse you would throw at it with the rigors of duty or carry, but really I'd wait for the Aimpoint Acro, which I think is probably going to do it a little bit better than the RMR. Now, as far as a range gun or a competition gun is concerned, if you're shooting an X5, it makes all the sense in the world to get the Romeo 1. If you're not shooting an X5, then I probably will give the nod to the Deltapoint Pro. It's just far more common. If you have to borrow a battery from somebody on the range, it's going to be easier to find a 2032 battery, as the 1632 seems to be less prevalent. So that's what I got for you guys. I definitely recommend the Deltapoint Pro. Although I really do like the Sig, I just think the Deltapoint Pro is probably a little bit more robust. And on the major sighting system of a pistol, I feel like that's probably ultimately a little bit more important than how I feel about the actual optic. But I do really like the Sig optic, and I look forward to continuing to use it in varying capacities. So that's what I got for you guys. I appreciate you guys watching. If you've made it this far, then I appreciate you. If you want to support me, head on over to harryholsters.com, order yourself a really awesome concealment holster. Use the discount code TheHumbleMarksman and save 10%. Or you can head over to Short Round Supply and buy yourself some of the stuff that fills up magazines with the code THM2019, which will save you 5% on your order. I appreciate you guys. Please like, do comment. I enjoy interacting with you guys, and I will catch you on the next one. Unless you're still here, in which case you want to talk about comments and play the comment game. And your challenge today, should you choose to accept it, is to talk about the shortcomings of the red dot. I need you to make a compelling case on why the color on an electronic sight needs to be something other than red. Really get creative, but make it believable, guys. I want like azure or, you know, just crazy named colors on why they're better. Chartreuse would be a good one. So that's your homework, guys. Get in the comments and tell me your favorite color that these dots should be other than red. I'll catch you guys on the next one.